Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Leah Purdy, Principal Client Advisor at Global Reviews, and really excited to be sharing with you some of the insights we've been working on at Global Reviews, both in the UK and also here in Australia. Today we're focusing on motor insurance and in particular what we're seeing on mobile devices. Today, just sharing a snapshot of what we've been working on with our clients and a few little bits and pieces that we've seen coming out of both regions. So today the agenda, so we should have you out of here in about 30 minutes. First of all, we're going to look at some of the things that are happening in the UK in terms of the impact of online research. So how is that benefiting different providers within that space? And then also we'll move on to looking at different things on their website that brands can be doing to increase their online conversion. Finally, we'll finish up with some of the insights that came out of our study in Australia. So for both sets of data, we are looking at data collected at the end of last year in December. So please do feel free to get in contact if you have any further questions. As I mentioned, just sharing with you some short snippets of what we've been seeing. So everything we're looking at today is seeking to answer this question, and the data we're looking at today is from our augmented product called Fruition, where we've enhanced our previous product known as the Digital Sales Effectiveness to help us better answer this question. So we'll be looking at some information today that looks at where in the site are consumers most likely to abandon and what can we do to combat that. Okay, so the first stage that we look at is discover. So when consumers are researching online, how does that impact their likelihood to choose your brand and what's impacting that? So just to briefly take you through our methodology and how we collect the data that we'll be looking at today. So firstly, we look at in-market consumers. So we recruit them via third-party panel providers. They execute all of our studies in their own environment by downloading a piece of software to their computer, or in this case, their mobile device. This allows us to track what they're doing, ask them questions, understand where on your website they're clicking or visiting, and because they're completing this research within their own environment, it's arguably the most natural experience because we're not looking over their shoulder all the time. The first task we ask them to do is what we call our discover task. So we ask them to complete research online, in this case look for a motor insurance provider that meets your needs. So for this task we don't direct them anywhere except online, and we're then able to see where they go online, what they do, what keywords they're searching, their propensity to visit a comparison site, for example, and if they are visiting your website, how did that impact their decision to choose you or a competitor. So what's important about this task is before we ask them to complete the task, we ask them who they would prefer, which brand they would choose if they had to choose then and there. After that research, we then ask them who they would now shortlist for further consideration, so allowing us to understand whether the online research process has allowed you to enter into the consideration set, and finally, who they would prefer now that they have completed that research online. The next stage of our study is what we call the consider phase. For this, we take our in-market consumers and we direct them to complete the online experience for a prospective customer on one particular website. So a portion of our consumers will complete the research on, let's say, amy.com.au, and another portion will complete the experience on coles.com.au. From here, we ask them a series of questions, but we also get them to complete a series of tasks. So the task we'll be looking at today is we ask them to complete a quote for motor insurance. So here we're able to get an understanding of what are the possible barriers or pain points that they're facing when they are looking to choose a car insurance provider. We also support that with our best practice audit, which looks at the features and functionality that your website provides and what are the gaps that there might be between you and your competitors that will further assist consumers in finding the information that they're looking for and choosing your brand. The final part of the study is what we call ACT. So once a consumer has decided to choose your brand as their car insurance provider, how easy are you making it for them to then apply online, or if they do prefer an offline channel, are you making that easy for them to find that information? So for the Discover task, so for the first part, we'll now be focusing on the Discover task. So as I mentioned, we ask our consumers to do as much online research as needed to identify a provider to supply you with motor insurance that best meets your needs. We ask them to do as much, not actually apply, but to do as much research as possible, and as needed to find a short list of providers and to select that final brand that would best meet their needs. So here we're looking at some of the metrics for one of the brands, Hastings Direct, in the UK. So as I mentioned, we are looking at UK data here with UK consumers. So some of the metrics that we capture. So first of all, you can see here brand recall. So that's unprompted. We ask them to name the top 5 motor insurance brands that come to mind. And we can see here that prior to online research, Hastings Direct really isn't top of mind for consumers. So they have quite low brand recall and also initial preference. After that online research is completed, what we see is that 28% would actually shortlist Hastings for further consideration. So that process of looking online, in terms of Hastings Direct analysing the digital channel, it's working really well for them. So they've managed to elevate their visibility and get into the consideration set. Finally, in terms of final preference, 13% would choose Hastings Direct at this point in time after completing online research. So they've managed to increase their share significantly, more than doubling it throughout that process. On the right-hand side, you can see a metric there called lost opportunity, and this is a figure we look at to understand what is actually the size of the pie and how many consumers are you missing out on where actually you were in the consideration set but they've chosen another brand. So for Hastings Direct, you can see there that it's 54%, which is actually, we'll look shortly, but it's a very good lost opportunity metric, and what that means is they're converting 46% of those who considered them, shortlisted them. They were able to convert quite a large portion of that in selecting them as final preference. So if we look at the lost opportunity scores across the UK, we can see that quite a few of the larger players within the UK market have quite large lost opportunity scores, whereas Hastings Direct is really the outlier here with a much better lost opportunity score. So looking for the lowest score there in terms of lost opportunity. So here we're able to get a better understanding of where this is really working for Hastings Direct and how they're managing to achieve this. So looking across the journey, we can see the primary brands that popped up in our study. So prior to online research, we can see in the orange there on the left that Churchill was the most recalled brand within the UK. Direct Line was actually initially preferred the most, and that's largely due to people having an existing relationship with the brand. Aviva performing really well in terms of managing to make the consideration set after online research, but what we can see down here is that Aviva isn't converting, that's not contributing to the largest share of final preferences, and actually Hastings Direct is really performing excellently in terms of final preference. So what are some of the things that we can identify are contributing to the success of Hastings? So within our study, we capture what is happening, but more importantly, it's really important for us to understand why these things are happening. So for initial preference, shortlist, and also final preference, we capture why a particular brand was chosen or selected for shortlist. So here we can see some of the top performing brands, and this helps us to understand why particular brands are making the shortlist for further consideration. So a few things just to call out here. For Direct Line, as I mentioned, existing relationships are performing really well for them and ensuring they make the consideration set. For Churchill, they're having quite good cut through into, and there's the perception in the market that they have good prices and offers. For Aviva, their brand awareness, their brand reputation is performing really well to ensure that they are making that consideration set. And we saw that they were the most considered brand across the UK. So the next step for Aviva is to make sure that they are able to convert those brands. For Hastings Direct, we can see that 63% of those who shortlisted Hastings Direct said that they shortlisted the brand because they had good offers and prices. So what might be contributing to that? Also down here, we can see that Hastings Direct slightly over-indexes compared to the other brands in terms of being chosen due to the website helping them to compare options. So we'll look at that a little bit later. So within the task, what we were able to see is that 70% of our audience visited an aggregator or comparison site at some point in the journey. So you can see some of the most common paths here. Of the comparison sites visited, these were the top three. So Confused, Go Compare, and Compare the Market, the most commonly visited comparison site within this motor insurance task. Identifying that Compare the Market is, in this case, the most important comparison site to be on, we had a look at what the results look like there. Within the top 10 results for a car insurance quote, Hastings have 3 individual listings within the top 10 results. And you can see here that you've got the Hastings Essential, Hastings Direct, arguably their standard product, and then also Hastings Premier. And it's clear here and easy for visitors to understand how these different options compare, and it's also giving them bigger real estate within the top 10 results within Compare the Market. So having this approach of promoting different tiers of products is working really well for Hastings. What we often see within motor insurance, and in particular on motor insurance websites, is that often the website will assume a level of knowledge. They often assume, or the pathways offered will assume that if someone wants comprehensive insurance, then that is the journey we will offer them, and if they want third party only, then that is the journey we will offer them. And often we might be missing out on the opportunity to upsell somebody who has initially come for third party but might be open to comprehensive if they better understand the benefits. So Hastings Direct here are giving themselves the best opportunity to not only upsell them but to articulate the benefits of the different products and hold more real estate within a key channel, Compare the Market, in this region. So moving on to Consider. So now in terms of the data, we'll be looking at the on-site experience for some of the different brands. So here we're looking at the different stages within the on-site experience. So this is how we break up the on-site experience within our study. If we look from left to right, we have initial engagement. So when someone first reaches the website, let's say to the home page, what are you telling them about your brand? Is it easy for them to identify that you do have motor insurance and what your value proposition for that product might be? The area or stage we're going to focus on today is introducing options, that second stage there. And this is really focusing on the quote, but also understanding, can they find the range of products that you offer for motor insurance? Can they easily complete a quote to understand what the options for them are? And we'll be diving into the quote task shortly here. What you can see there, and this is part of the new version of our product, you can see that after completing this task, actually 13% said they would abandon the website there. If we put that into context, 33% of visitors to Admiral, Swift and Churchill said they would abandon the site and not return after completing the quote on those websites. So actually Hastings are performing very well in that area, and we'll have a look why that might be. So it's really, this data really helps us to identify what is actually the risk if we do nothing to improve our experience within the quote tool. And also which are the areas we need to focus on within our site. Is it looking at product content? Is it looking at the quote tool to help us prioritize our roadmap? Moving along just to explain some of the other stages. So evaluating the product options looks at, can visitors actually find specific product information that might be really important to their decision making. So for example, can they find information about whether you offer hire car or what is covered within the motor insurance policy, through to content around facilitating a decision, getting them to apply, and finally looking at the application process. So as I mentioned, here's the task. So we ask our consumers, and again this is in the UK, to get a motor insurance quote for comprehensive car insurance. So it's for a very simple car, no modifications, no claims, etc. So the objective here is to understand how they find the experience and what are the friction points within the funnel that we can potentially remove to increase that flow and encourage more people to complete the quote process more easily. So looking at 3 examples here, we've got First Central, Churchill and Hastings Direct. So after they complete the quote, we ask them to tell us from 1 to 10 how satisfied they were completing this task. We also ask them if they faced any problems, and if they did, what problems were they? And here we're able to get out some really nice voice of customer that helps us identify what the pain points are. So for First Central, we can see here that 56% said they experienced a problem when completing the quote task, and 34%, so 1 in 3, said they felt the quote process took longer than expected. For Churchill, 80% of visitors experienced a problem, and again 1 in 3 felt the process took longer than expected. Finally, for Hastings Direct, still a large amount of people experiencing a problem. Motor insurance as an industry does suffer from a long quoting process compared to other industries such as energy or health insurance that our consumers are also engaging with. Car insurance does require a larger amount of information. So we do see a higher propensity of consumers saying that they experience a problem within motor insurance, but the key outlier here that we can see is that only 20% of Hastings Direct visitors said they felt the quote process took longer than expected. So why is this important? The more consumers find that they feel the quote process took longer than expected, the more likely they are to abandon the task, the more likely they are to become frustrated. So we've identified what problems they're experiencing. After completing the task, we also ask them what would they be most likely to do next if this was a real life situation. And this is, again, as I mentioned, to help us understand what the risk is, but also what the behaviour is after completing a quote task. So not many across the different brands are likely to look for help and support, but the key here that I'll draw your attention to is the blue section. So I would abandon the website due to frustration and not come back. And we can see here that Hastings is performing very well, and we can see that some of the frustrations and reasons contributing to abandonment across some of the other brands is due to the difficulty in completing the form, and also in terms of how long the form was perceived to complete. So if we have a look actually at the forms, we can see that on the left-hand side, Hastings actually has a longer form than Churchill and First Central. So the perception that Churchill and First Central are longer than expected is not based on the fact that the forms are longer. So this clearly is to do with the execution, and what we'll do is jump into how Hastings Direct are actually executing their quote tool compared to these other brands where people are more likely to be frustrated with the perceived length of the quote form. On the second column we can see the number of sections. So there's two clear strategies. Do we have fewer sections with longer pages, or as you can see Hastings Direct have a significantly higher number of sections but shorter pages. So there's no right or wrong way, it all comes down to execution. If you are executing long pages, you know, there's opportunity to look at auto-scrolling to the next field, but looking at expandable sections, many different strategies in terms of each approach to reduce frustration and reduce the amount of time it takes to complete. On the right hand side we can see the different formats in terms of the inputs required. So anecdotally, and also what we see coming out of our studies, is that if given clear options, a button is usually faster to complete, particularly on mobile, than a drop-down menu. We can see here that Hastings Direct is using a higher proportion of button inputs than free text entry and drop-downs compared to the other brands. So this is one area where it's really important, and even more important on mobile, to look and really validate why you are using that particular type of input and whether it's the right type of input for that particular question. So we want to reduce the amount of effort required from our users to help them speedily get through the form. But the other thing to remember is that it's also important to make sure that the quality of the answers and inputs that we're getting from our consumers is also high, because we need to look at the full experience. If they are if we're making it easier for them, but that input is then going to be incorrect and create issues further down the line, then that's where the benefit of making it quicker and faster doesn't actually pay off. So what we're looking at here, on the top we've got First Central, and we're looking at the quote process and the different types of inputs that they are using for their quote tool. On the bottom we're looking at Hastings Direct. So you can see at the top the different types of inputs. So in the orange we have free text, in the green we have buttons, which as we've discussed are arguably often the easiest to complete. And then we've got the different types of drop-downs in the blue and yellow. So what we're looking at here is how the order in which we were asking the different types of questions might be impacting visitors' perception on how easy the form is to complete and how long the process feels. So as we saw, it isn't actually true that Hastings has a shorter form, it just is perceived to be easier to complete by their visitors. So if we have a look at the button inputs, the fastest and easiest to complete in many scenarios, we can see that for Hastings, they've spread out those types of inputs right across the journey. So quite a few up front, throughout the middle, and also at the end. Whereas for First Central, a lot of those easy to complete buttons are right at the end of the funnel, meaning that a higher amount of effort is required up front and also within the middle of the funnel. So by Hastings peppering these types of questions throughout, it can give the perception to the user that they are moving more quickly throughout the funnel, and we can also see that they have opted for this type of input more frequently than First Central has. So want to reiterate here that we're absolutely not saying to change all of your quote tool inputs to buttons, and that will increase your conversion rates, but wanted to share with you a hypothesis or what we're seeing in terms of the UK that is assisting Hastings Direct in assisting their consumers to complete their quote process. If we have a look at Churchill, who we saw had 80% of users experiencing a problem and also a very high rate of people feeling that the process was too long, we can see that again this pattern is reiterated. So buttons very much offered at the end of the quote process, and throughout the middle and start there's a much higher amount of effort required from the users going through the quote process. So how can we impact this? So here we're looking at different questions that the UK market ask across the 3 brands, and we can see that for many across the different brands there isn't a consistent flow of how and when these questions are asked, when these questions are asked throughout the process. So often we'll approach building a quote tool and we'll say, okay, first we want to ask them about the car, then we want to ask them about your personal details, your name, your address, and then we'll go on to ask more specific details. But there's opportunity here to consider how you are grouping your questions. So can you look at adjusting the grouping to optimize the way and the order you are asking these different questions to make it easier for consumers to feel like they are flowing through the process and moving through faster than if they are required to put in quite a lot of effort at the front end, increasing the likelihood of them abandoning. So grouping fields can be done in many different ways, but they must still be logical. So if we think about how many forms we fill out across many different industries, we will be used to completing certain fields in a particular order. So it's important to make sure that we're not just changing the groupings and changing the order of the questions to make sure that the level of effort is consistent throughout, but it needs to meet visitors' expectations to a certain extent. So for example, are we commonly used to entering first name then last name? If we adjust that, is there going to be a higher proportion of errors due to people putting in their first name in the last name field? Also, how are we used to entering address? Are we what delivers a better experience? For the UK, it might be postcode first due to the accuracy of their postcodes, whereas in Australia the order in which we're used to that might be quite different. So making sure that we are doing what we can to make that effort consistent, but also reducing errors by looking at the order in which we're asking questions is really important. So what are some of the things that Hastings Direct do well? And it's by no means perfect. There are definitely opportunities for Hastings to improve. So one of the first things they do is they do offer the opportunity to dynamically search for the details for your car by simply entering your registration. This is obviously a much faster experience entering 6, 7 letters and numbers rather than entering all the different details of your car, which is often up to 10 different fields, using many drop-downs and selection fields. They're using nice user-friendly language to encourage visitors to move through and complete. Large buttons that are easy to select on a mobile device so that we're not having to focus really hard just to ensure we're clicking the right option. This form actually scrolls automatically, so once a user, for example in this screenshot on the top question has clicked yes, the form will automatically scroll down to the next question, so making it a little bit easier for the user, removing the requirement to scroll, which can frustrate users and make them feel that they're becoming lost within the form. So using predictive text and offering suggestions within the search fields. And also for Hastings, postcode is entered, but then the drop-down options are the full address, so that someone can make that selection in 2 fields rather than other providers which have asked for postcode and then asked for unit number, street, and all of the fields separately. But again, for Hastings, there are areas where they're offering a QWERTY keyboard, where they could be offering simply a numerical keyboard, which is easier to use. So still a significant amount of opportunity for Hastings Direct to improve their user experience within the quote tool. So after completing the tasks, we ask our consumers to tell us, how did this website help you research and decide to choose this company for your car insurance? So in the orange, we've got what we call our judging the experience metric, and here we're looking for a higher score. So our consumers are asked to rate whether they agree that the website did assist them, from 1 to 10, with 10 being they strongly agree. And we can see there that Hastings Direct has one of the highest scores. We also asked them at the end of the study, how much effort did the website require you to put in order to achieve your outcomes and complete the tasks. Here we asked them from 1 to 5, and we're looking for a lower score. We're looking for the lowest amount of effort required. And again, we can see that Hastings Direct is leading the market there. So now we'd just like to share with you just some of the snapshots that we saw from the Australian study executed at the end of last year, and just looking at some of the wins and also pain points that we've seen throughout the quote tool. So on mobile devices, this isn't a new insight, but even in 2017, users completing date of birth or simple date entries and also address functionality is still a significant pain point. This came out across several of the different brands that we measured who are offering this functionality in several different ways. So we can see there on the right, ALLIANZ is offering it as a manual typing input. For GIO on the left, we can see that they're offering the drop-down scroll functionality. We also saw that for Budget Direct on an Android device, that using the calendar input also provided some problems for users. So we absolutely haven't got this right yet, but there are many ways in which we can look at optimizing the experience, but still a key pain point within the Australian industry on mobile devices. One option I just want to share with you, it's important to continue to test across all of your devices, tablets, Android, etc. When you do log into ING Direct Internet Banking, they offer you this keypad. So for ING Direct, they've taken their reliance off device provided inputs, and they're offering their own keyboard, which you can see here. So important to continue testing. Make sure that you are testing the different types of inputs, and also maybe it is worth considering, do we want to build our own functionality to reduce that frustration within the quote funnel. AMI performed very well within the quote funnel. There's a few things that they do quite well. So you can see here in relation to what we were talking about earlier with the types of inputs, AMI use a significant amount of buttons throughout their form. So on the left-hand side, please select your car. When there are only a few options, they're providing that easy on-page selection rather than the drop-down menu. Over on the right-hand side, you can see even when they're offering options up to 6, so in the last 3 years, how many car-related claims has the main driver had. They're also offering that as on-page options so that visitors can quickly and easily complete. Because that is a numerical option, it's very easy for visitors to scan those on-page options and select them quite quickly. Their buttons are large, so very user-friendly on a mobile device. We still see quite a large portion of mobile options being very, very small, and that requires not only increased effort for visitors to really focus on pressing the right option, but it also often results in a larger amount of errors being experienced through visitors accidentally clicking the incorrect option. Very good contextual help to ensure they're providing enough support to facilitate the user through, both through format indicators, but also these help messages which are only shown through those who need it, for those who need it. And finally, pinned call to action, so making it easy for visitors to navigate through to the next step. Two different approaches, as we mentioned, so we can see that ALLIANZ is offering a 3-step quote process with quite long pages, whereas Budget Direct takes the complete opposite approach. Easier for them because they are offering only an estimate, a shorter form, but offering primarily on-page button options to complete the form. 30% of ALLIANZ visitors, after they completed the quote, said that they found the process too long. So if you are having a look at the ALLIANZ quote process, a few things that they might be able to improve. So ALLIANZ visitors request that the user select a date manually, whereas other brands will just enter today's date. ALLIANZ are asking for the car registration number. However, after confirming the vehicle, they are still required to enter all of the details manually. So that may be causing some frustration through visitors who feel that that will be dynamically searched for after entering their registration. They're also utilising drop-down menus for a simple yes-no question. So some opportunities there that ALLIANZ might be able to improve their quote. 20% of NRMA visitors said they found the navigation hard to follow when completing the quote. So for this quote process, we start them on the car insurance page. You can see there the get a quote call to action in the green. After looking at the click path for the quote tool, so usually the issues found within the quote task are based on usability within the form. So what we can see here with the click path for NRMA is that quite a large portion of NRMA visitors actually took at least 3 clicks to actually get into the quote process, despite the call to action being on the car insurance page. What we often see with horizontal call to actions is that consumers often miss them. So they're looking for something that does look like a call to action on the page, and it may be that visitors are missing this due to thinking that it's just a design element or a banner or something that is targeted at existing customers. So in summary, just closing off some of the insights that we've looked at today. As I mentioned, just a snapshot of what we've been looking at over the past few months. So it's important to think about how you're presenting the mix of your different product options, both on your website, but also how that's being shown on comparison sites or review sites. So make sure that you are presenting that information to clearly articulate the benefit of each option, but also to help consumers understand that you do have a product option that meets their needs, and helping them to understand the differences between them. Consider the order in which questions are asked. So obviously input is really key. Continue to test that, to investigate your site-centric data, but also consider, are we grouping our questions within the form in the most optimal way to help visitors continue effortlessly through the quote process. As I mentioned, continue to review question format, but make sure that that is balanced with quality control. So absolutely do not become so focused on providing the fastest option if that is going to result in more errors further down the track. Pay special attention to date and address inputs. Consumers are still having a significant amount of difficulty with this on mobile devices within Australia. So really important that there will always be some who find it difficult, but if we can reduce that number as much as possible, then that will serve as well. As always, continue to test. Execution is absolutely key. What might be working for one brand within the market executed slightly different on your site may have a much better or a poor outcome. So thank you so much for joining us today. So just in summary, we've focused on a few key snapshots to demonstrate some of the types of things that we've been working on with our clients over the past few months. As a subscribing client, we work with you generally twice a year across these different executing the studies twice a year, coming out and working with you very closely to identify the key opportunities for you, whether that be a bit supporting a business case for budget or whether it be looking at BAU optimization. And we also work with a lot of clients on bespoke projects to answer more specific questions that perhaps our syndicated study doesn't focus on specifically. If you do have any more questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch. We'll be emailing out the video. But thank you so much for joining us today, and have a good day.